in your own shop when you don't have an audience.
But how do you get the French bridge to be exactly right on the male and the female? It would seem to me that if you pull the tool a little faster or a little slower.
Go ahead, you're good at 5.
Oh, no. The threads obviously have to interfere with one another. So depending on which pitch you're using, that the distance from the top of that thread to the bottom of the valley is different on every pitch. So there's a whole series of charts and ways to do it, and Roy was nice enough to give me a very detailed chart of how to do that. Most of which I have forgotten, the rest of which I don't use because I've been doing that thread, which is 12, so often that now I only use those. Well, no, wait, that thread is 16, so that is a little different. So it's back and forth. No, it's actually I have to, because we're dealing in thousands.
For 16 threads per inch, the difference between the ID and the OD is bigger than the ID, is 140% of your thread depth. The thread depth on a 16 is the number 866 divided by 16, which is 54. 54 times 1.4 is the 76.
Did you get that?
It's 76 now. Is that right?
On the threads for that particular piece, the difference in diameter is about 5 thousandths. 5 thousandths? Yeah, it's about 5 thousandths. Yeah, it's about maybe a little bit more than 5 thousandths. In order to get it so it really works.
A nice thread is that it engages about 70% of the theoretical depth. In what? I like 16, you like 12, but 16 seems to work. But I don't do single lead, I do double lead.
Yeah. Now, what he's talking about, I have a single lead on that, which means that the thread starts right at the top and it goes around in essentially one ramp. Roy does 2 or 4.
I can do 3.
2 or 3.
Or 4.
And what that does is it means that when you put the cap on the bottom, for instance, when you put the cap on, you don't have to hunt all the way around to find a place for that to start. It'll start either right over here or halfway around. It's also a steeper thread, right?
No, I do that because if you think about your jelly jar, what happens? You like to do like that, which is one turn. You like the lid to come off. If you're doing something to mechanically hold it together, then multiple turns is a great idea. But one of the critiques of my work was why to come off like that, and that's a full turn. So basically, you make your threads about, if they're double lead, they're 16 threads per inch. It ends up being about that much thread.
And you'll notice that all of the things that are getting passed around that I've done require multiple turns to come off. I've done a couple that this one. This one only takes less than a half full turn.
Okay, comes off.
Well, hand chasing by itself is a complete demonstration, and I'd have to spend a lot more time learning how to do it before I could do that. the fact is I can do it, but I'm not a good demonstrator of it. What I wanted to do is include it within this discussion. The other thing you can do is thread with taps, which is, for instance, and actually most of us have already done this. For instance, how many people have made bottle stoppers with metal fittings on the bottom? Did you use the Niles mandrel or a mandrel? If you notice, the Niles mandrel, and probably a mandrel that you used, has a little V-cut in it. So essentially now all those threads are teeth, and they cut a thread in the wood. And now when you're all done with that on the mandrel and you unscrew it, you're able to screw the metal part right in. So most of you have already worked with this kind of thread, or if you have ever used that little thing that came with your chuck, which most of you haven't used probably. The screw chuck is exactly the same thing. It's a really versatile way to hold a piece of work. It's fast. You can take things on and off. So it's a good way to use screws. But we can also tap. We can also tap a piece of wood for particular threads. And lately, well, I suppose you could always do this. You could have bought a thread tap and die set from Harbor Freight or Grizzly or somebody like that, and put threads in wood that would fit a 1/4 bolt or any bolt that you wanted to buy at Home Depot. Lately, there are now some tap sets which have been specifically designed for wood, meaning they have a little bit, they have a couple more recesses, so they eject chips a little bit better. And now it's real easy to make jigs or something like that, which have holes in the wood, and then literally use bolts right out of Home Depot. So you can use them. But we can also do that with a chuck from, a tap from Beal, and some of you have already done this. This is a tap that's the same size as the spindle on a couple of my lathes. So I'm able to make these chucks pretty quickly. I can make them, they're inexpensive. It's a piece of hard maple tapped. Then there's another piece of hard maple, or really anything that I've got. I face it off, and now I can glue whatever I'm going to work with directly to that using CA glue, so I can snap it off. And that gives me something that I can move from this lathe to something else, and it'll always be centered. I don't have to worry about trying to center it again in a 4-jaw chuck. They're wood, so eventually they wear out, but they're so easy to make that it's pretty simple. Does anybody not know how to do that? Because I could demonstrate it, but I don't know that we need to go through that. Yes? Okay. All right, so we'll make one real fast. This is a piece of hard maple. It's been pre-drilled.
Probably 7/8 now.
I believe it is 7/8 because it's an inch. It's 1/8 of an inch less than the diameter of the tap. You'll notice that there is a recess that I've cut here. That recess is because most of the spindles, it's probably easiest to see on this, have a little flat down here. If you didn't make that recess, it wouldn't bottom out correctly, and it would. No, that's not going to work, is it?
Murphy show up?
Murphy got here before I did, I think. We'll do this at the end, because this isn't really what you're paying for. But I will do it at the end, and you can come up and watch it closely. So another way to do it is with a tap, a dime, and a tap that does essentially the same thing that's on a wooden broom handle. These are pretty much readily available. I got this one from Woodcraft. This is the die. Let's see if I can do that without cutting it. And as it cuts, there's a little piece of steel in here, and a thread. So once that steel cuts the thread, it starts to thread itself. The disadvantage of this is that if you're working on a anything but a dowel, you're always going to have that part that's not threaded, which isn't so bad if you're just doing a broom handle, for instance, to extend the roller for your painting or something like that. This was 3/4. You could get them inch, 5. You can get them all sorts of sizes. I think Woodcraft used to have a whole shelf full of them, and I like them because they're kind of fun to play with. These are
Over here.
This is a little nut and bolt. I'm passing a couple of them around.
Looks rusty. No galvanized?
No galvanized. There we go. Okay, so those are kind of fun. So what you guys really wanted to see was the threading jig. There are a number of threading jigs on the market. Chef makes one. Bonnie Klein used to make one. I don't think that one's available anymore at all. Best Wood Tools makes one called the Baxter Threader, which is what this one is.
Simon Hope.
Hmm?
Simon Hope makes a threader.
Do they?
Yeah.
They all operate pretty much on the same principle, which is a lead screw, which is what this is right here. I have to screw around every time I put this on because the slot in my ways is smaller up here than it is here, which fascinates me. Okay. All right. So this is a Baxter threader. I'll go over some of the. This is the lead screw. This is the head of this and the lead screw are replaceable, and this is replaceable. This is set up as a 1x8, so it matches the spindle on my lathe. I can get 10, 8, 16, and get all sorts of different pitches for this lead screw. I happen to have chosen 12 because I thought when I bought this that that was going to be the most effective for doing cherry and walnut and a lot of the softer woods that I knew that I could get the most of. So, and it turns out it's been pretty effective at that. This slides back and forth on two blocks. The top block here is controlled by this knob right here. These are thousandths, which you can see. And the bottom block is controlled by this, and it's an extension block, so that I theoretically can do a threaded opening which is as large as 5 inches. In fact, you probably don't want to do that because the wood, dry as you can make it, is still probably going to move. And at 5 inches, there's an awful lot of area there that's going to change shape. And the threads are probably going to jam at some point during their lifetime. So this is the So now I've turned this with a little tenon that's going to be my threaded section on either on this lathe or on another lathe using one of the threaded chucks that I made. Now when I bring it over here and put it on here, I know that it's still going to be reasonably centered. It's also not going to weigh much, which I think is important. I've used a 4-jaw chuck on this, but it's real heavy, and I really would prefer that it be as light as possible. That's why I use these. That's the other reason I use these chucks. To cut the threads, I'm going to use. Can you get that?
I'm trying the cords,
Okay.
not cooperating.
This is a 60-degree mill, which I've modified slightly. I've modified it by grinding off this face because, as we pointed out before, your threads aren't very deep, so I don't need a lot of depth here, but I do need to be able to get right down close to the bottom. Is that good for you? I need to be able to get down close to the bottom of a recess. So that's why I've taken off the end of this.
You say you just flatten?
I just
flatten the end of it?
flatten the end of it. That way I can get closer to the bottom of a blind hole without fouling out too much.
So you don't need to make a groove?
Theoretically, yes. I mean, the instructions for this and Nick Cook's instructions, they all say make a groove, but for most of these I don't bother because I extend it slightly past where I need to be so that my pieces are landing on the outer edges. So they're not going all the way down. And a lot of the ones when I'm doing an actual box, the threads just go into space anyway, so you don't need anything there. Okay, so this goes on here. These cutters are made to mount in a collet with a drawbar, which makes them really very, they're centered well. It's nice and sturdy, all of that stuff. But to move it in and out, to change it, and all of that, I found that was really not very. It just took a long time. Bonnie Klein made this piece for me. She made it for a lot of people. I think I probably got one of the last few she'd ever made, which means it can screw right on my spindle, and it actually turns really concentric. So I'm not too worried about it. All right, now to cut this thread, I'm going to want to I'm going to set this at 0 so I know where I am. And I'm going to want to bring that so I'm just barely touching the wood. And then I can back this up, and then this is the way I advance it through the wood. Advance the cutter through the wood, and that's where it stops. So I know from stuff that Roy has given me and from experience that I'm going to want to cut this thread 65 thousandths. So this brings this in. And when I first started using this, I tried cutting the 65 thousandths all in one pass. That made a mess, a pretty big mess of the thread, and they didn't hold up at all. And gradually, I've gotten down to the point where I only do them 10 thousandths at a time, particularly on the softer woods. Some people put CA glue, soak these with CA. I find that if you're not really careful with that you will get you'll get CA all over the rest of it, and then you're limited to the kind of finish you can put on it. I've also tried using Mahoney's walnut oil on here. Doesn't seem to make that much of a difference. I've used mineral oil. I've used just plain wax. And in fact, if you cut slow enough, it seems to work just fine with nothing. And so I end up putting wax on the threads when I'm done. The cutter? Whatever my lathe was set at. I think it's about 1200. Yeah, this lathe, I've had this lathe for years, and I don't think I've changed the speed from 1200 more than once. So now there we've cut. If I was doing this as a box or something that I was going to spend a lot of time on, I probably would have beveled that edge slightly right here. That way, you see where this is real fine. It would have eliminated some of that, but you're still going to get some of that. You can see it broke out a little here. And I will pass this around.
How do you clean the threads up?
I use a toothbrush. And a toothbrush and maybe a little wax. I'll do that on the inside one. The inside one is really, it's exactly the same. I don't think it makes a whole lot of difference, at least it doesn't to me, if I cut on this side or this side, even on the male or the female. So I always cut close to me, but that means that when I'm doing the female side, I have to turn this knob this way, And when I'm doing the male side, I have to turn it this way because I want to move when I'm doing the male side, I have to move the cutter into the wood. And when I'm doing the female side, I have to move the cutter into the wood. And there's a little lead screw in here that this knob controls. So I've got it set. And you can see that I'm just going to take this right all the way down to the bottom. And because there's no cutter on the face of that, I'm exaggerating it right here, but I can feel when that's hit the bottom. And so if I'm doing this, I'm really paying attention to what the feel is, because you can't get get in there to see what's going on. Some people don't like to cut both directions. I found that it doesn't make that much of a difference to me. If you didn't want to cut both directions, you would be moving this, and then there'd be a lot more motions here that I think is just, I think they're wasted motions. Okay, so does everybody understand how that works? All right, now, say that you've screwed up. And what? I should have thought of it. So say that you've screwed up and you have to remount this. Well, it is possible to do, because I can come in here and with a little practice and back and forth, I can get that cutter right back in the groove and start again. And if you have mismeasured and things aren't coming together, and you find that you've got to take a little off of here to make the inside a little bit bigger. Now you have to put it back on the lathe, take a little bit off. Now you've got to put it back on here and start again. It is possible to do that, both on the inside and with the male thread. Obviously, the male thread's a little easier because you can see what's happening, but you can do this one by feel. It is completely possible to do it by feel. But so you did the whole thing. Male, I don't know which one is the male. Which one's the male? But, no, so you've got a male and a female, and you did the whole thing. These black lines represent where the grain would line up. And it doesn't line up. So in order to get that grain to line up, you've got to get it apart first. Come on. This is not going to work. So what you have to do in order to get it to line up is take a little bit out of the middle here. I hope you don't mind, but I modified your lathe so it locks. So I could either take a little bit off this face, right here, or a little bit off this face. And that's assuming that my thread is long enough here to accommodate this distance, otherwise it would bottom out here. I believe that this is long enough for this demonstration, so I'll show you what So in order to get them to line up, you just simply take a little bit off. And you've done this a lot, right?
You know, I look at how much I have to go, and then I
You do it all at once?
No, I can speak up on it.
Yeah.
Just like what you're doing. And have it done too far, yes.
And you don't want to make it line up exactly. You want to leave it just a little off, because as somebody opens and closes it, it's going to come right. It's going to come right so the grain lines up. Everybody understand that, how that works? I'm surprised it worked as well as it did.
What was the formula again between the outside and inside diameter?
It's 140% of your thread length. And your thread depth is the number 0.866 divided by your threads per inch. I got it out.
But when I'm doing these at 12, I know that I'm cutting them 65 thousandths, and that when I have either I know that dimension for the inside thread, that I have to make my the outside of my male thread 90,
About 90, probably.
yeah, about 90 thousandths bigger. And then it'll work. But it's also incredibly important that all of those, that everything be straight and line up right with the bed of your lathe. One way to do that, of course, is to use a straight edge in there and see that it lines up with the bed.
How do you make sure the jig is
This, it's tied up against the wedge. It locks in. One of the other, I got this to do threads, but I also got it because I really liked the way it looked. and I like the way it worked. It's just, it's incredibly well thought out.
The one advantage of that thing is that thread that you turn on, that needs to be tight. One of the weaknesses of the other design is that you couldn't adjust that, how tight it was, and would wiggle, and you get poor results.
Do you see this?
One gets much better results because you can adjust the lash.
There it goes. See that?
How tight that thread.
With
There's like 5 cent screws on top. for 5 cents.
There's these, and then this can take out a lot of the play as well. And there's another one down here to take the play out of this piece. It's just, it's a very, very well thought out piece. They're not cheap by any means. About $400, $450. And this block right here, no, one of these blocks, trying to remember which one it is. I've got two blocks because I originally bought this for a one-way 1224, and then I realized that it would be better on this lathe, so I had to buy another riser block, but it was only like $50.
The thing that holds the cutter, you said that what comes with it is a collet chuck, and it seems the collet chuck, only bends the collet chuck, but it automatically centers it.
It does.
All right. And in that situation, they machined out the hole to hold the cutter, and then you use set screws. Is that whole machine perfectly for the size of the cutter?
It seems to be. I mean, it works really well.
It really doesn't matter if you wiggle, and you'll still get good results if you feel
Well, you could, if you wanted, use a collet and an Allen wrench and sharpen the Allen wrench and use it like a fly cutter. So it would be this cutter with only one tooth. And you use fly cutters all the time.
That's the way I do it because I have a unique shape. I have this goofy shape that I'm project up and actually ground the cutter. It's one cutter. And I typically climb cut because I get less chip out, but depends on the wood you're using.
So that would be essentially if I mounted something like this and it's spinning this way.
That works. You have to go a little slower, maybe run the shaft a little bit faster, but it works fine.
Yeah. I'll pass this around. Be careful. This is still reasonably sharp.
Have you ever had to buy a new one?
No, but they're
You can get them.
MSC.
MSC has them. I think they're about $35.
Yeah, they're not expensive. But as I said, the first thing you have to do is grind the face off.
Is it specific for wood?
No, it's actually a steel piece. I think it's actually for steel.
They're high-speed steel. They're not terribly expensive.
Do you sharpen them?
No, I think I could, but I have never done it. And I think I do it just by holding a diamond hole up to it while it was going.
I just throw it away, start over.
Yeah, well, ultimately that's probably exactly what I'll do. Now, this jig, as I said, will do something as large as maybe 5 inches, and this is about the smallest it'll do, which is, these little acorns. And the limiting factor in how small that piece you can make is cutters inside here in order to cut the inside thread. So if this hole is smaller than your cutter, it's never going to work. So these little acorns are about I think maybe 1/10 of an inch bigger inside than my cutter. Just enough that I can get the cutter in the can. Nick Cook has written an article on this and making acorns, but his acorns are about this big. Any other questions on the collet part? Did that answer your question?
Yes.
And that's what they ship. They ship a collet and a dropper. So it's that right there. But I just didn't think that was. I mean, I knew it was more accurate, but it wasn't as user friendly. And at that time, I was taking it off and putting it on. Now it lives on this lathe most of the time. The other thing, here's the other right.
Did you compare that before you bought that? Did you look at the other designs?
I've looked at some of the other designs. There is one design where this is hinged back here and it flips up so you can investigate what you're doing, but that's another moving part. So it's something else that's going to get a little wonky.
And they've got one too, it's the same one that you can make spheres.
You probably can't make the sphere with the same one, but it wouldn't surprise me that the same company made a sphere jig.
It's it's a different. I think it has that flip up thing.
Yeah.
Put a different flip up. Yeah. And that flip up thing has some chisel in it.
That's the chefware.
Yeah. Well,
That's the chefware.
I've
I've used the Simon Hope one and the chefware, both of them. I've used both. They all work on the same principle as this. This has one definite advantage, that it fits between the ways. The others fit in the tailstock. And if you don't get your tailstock lined up perfectly straight, you're going to cut threads heavier on one side than on the other. And it's easy enough to get off just a little bit.
Yeah, this one probably would get off a little bit, but it's pretty tight.
Yeah, but they all work on the same principle. And I have used the, Dave Skaggs bought one of each. I don't know if some of you might know Dave, but he bought a chefware as well as the Simon Oaks. The Simon Oaks are out of England. And I've had the opportunity to use them both. He let me have to take them in my shop and play with them. They cut great threads, but you gotta set them up right.
And the Vine Klein one is very, very similar to this, except that it's a lot smaller. I think it was originally designed to go on her lathe, which, and the headstock on her lathe was 3/4 inch, I think. It's a really small piece. And I like this one a lot better. This is the other part that comes with it. They give you two face plates, so you can do exactly what I do with my.
This is definitely heavier built and probably better built than either the Oak or the Chicago. They're not machines like this is.
Yeah, this is absolutely beautiful.
That's a beast.
Well, that fit, the bed, the width between the rails, is that the same?
I don't know if it's the same on this, but it is. The distance between the rails on this one is virtually identical to the distance between the rails on my 1224. Because this works just as well on the 1224. And it's just as easy to set up. Actually, it's easier because you can slide it in. This is too small. Any other questions?
You didn't make the spiral on
No, that's done with the sorting tool, which is a lot of fun.
You just showing off with that. I noticed that all of your trucks have that spiral.
They don't all have it, but most of them do. I've done a couple like this one where I was just playing with the texture, because if you do them smooth like this, which is the way I did them all originally, you can't get them off. So I had to get one of those plumber's strap wrenches, and that's how I get them off. And then I started putting grooves on them, and it works a lot better, and it gives me some practice. Anything else? Okay, you wanted to see how to do a chuck. So while we're doing the break, I'll do that.
I apologize for the HDMI. My other camera Tom was using last month, he has it, and I need to use a link. I think the socket's broke in this camera, so that's why the HDMI kept kicking out. I think the cord is fine, it's the rest of it. So this, can I put this on YouTube?
It's huge and really enjoyed it. I took Monday off and went home and slept. Just to recover. It's absolutely fantastic. So, any open items or any new business anyone wants to bring up at this point? Bruce?
If you haven't already, after the intermission, I don't think it'll be here at the end, but if you stop back and have Dave take the picture, it only takes a second. We put together an album to our directory